Reaction to the world economic recovery shows how countries have become too reliant on the largesse of central banks. And finally, also in The Guardian, it is official, Facebook is for older people. According to a new report, teens and young adults are leaving the social networking site as popularity surges among the over 55s. So let's go more on all these stories even. With me is Oliver Cornock, Editor-in-Chief at the Oxford Business Group. Oliver, welcome back. And we're starting with the Telegraph and this story that is engulfing Oxfam at the moment, but also threatens to engulf the Department for International Trade. Tell us more about this.
Absolutely. It's one of these sort of terrible sex scandal stories that we've heard, you know, the like of before, sadly. Tip of the iceberg headlines, all of these things. And of course, actually, it does feel as though this is snowballing, doesn't it? And over the weekend, we heard Priti Patel, who lost her job as head of the Department for International Trade here in London in November, saying that she'd flagged up problems with this before and they were brushed aside by officials in the department. She'd done a great deal, of course, to try and put international aid from the UK on a more firmer footing. Any of us who travel around the world realise that in some of the poorer places in the world that receive aid, it often just goes into the pockets of dictators. I mean, she was doing a lot to try and work on that, and of course it does play slightly to that narrative, doesn't it, that there was corruption of some sort. Add into this the sexual element, it really is pretty seedy. Sex for aid is some of the sort of more lurid headlines we're seeing. But step back a bit, and it does feel as though the sort of industrialisation of aid giving, you know, it's not immune, just like Hollywood isn't immune from some of the seedier side of life.
I think the questions are, though, what did they have in place? What safeguarding did they have in place? Not just Oxfam, but many charities which are now being implicated.
Absolutely.
To protect the people that actually should be protecting, you know, as part of the job.
Absolutely. And you look at this, and in Haiti, it seems that some of the victims of this earthquake that Oxfam was there to help with were embroiled with this sort of prostitution. And I don't know the details, but it's pretty seedy.
And the issue for Oxfam isn't just its reputation, it's whether or not it's going to be financially viable.
It receives £32 million a year from the UK government, and it's, you know, in these austere times, it's not surprising that Penny Mordaunt, the head of this office now, is calling that into question and saying unless we have some really watertight reasons and some mechanisms put in place to avoid this going forward, that this is not sustainable. And I think that we'll all welcome that.
Absolutely. Plenty more on that to come, I'm sure. Let's have a look at the Arab news. And the headline here, Iran's meddling is a threat to all in the region, the US says. It's certainly a headline that we've seen before. Is there a shift now at the moment, though, do you think?
Well, first, this is in the Arab news. It's important to point that out. This is a Saudi paper. Saudi Arabia, of course, is at loggerheads with Iran. Yeah. It's sheer foe in the region. I think it is a changing game in Syria. We're seeing the end of the territorial element of ISIS in both Syria and Iraq. And this is just leading to another part of this awful conflict. It's like a multi-headed hydra to me. And Iran is in there. I mean, the simple fact is, just in the same way that Assad is going to be around this negotiating table, in my mind, so is Iran. And unfortunately, Iran is meddling within the region. I think we're pretty confident about that, both in Yemen as well. And Saudi Arabia are very conscious of that. But it does, to me, point to the fact that Iran is going to be part of the solution as well. We're not there yet. This isn't probably even the beginning of the end, but it does mark a shift. I think the other thing you mentioned in another part of the programme, you know, this Israel's intervention in Syria. Israel historically has, obviously, one of Israel's foes is Syria. But they've always traditionally managed to keep a bit of a stalemate, a silent stalemate, no conflict. This is a marked escalation. All of us who watch the Middle East will be watching this very carefully to see whether there's any further escalation in Israeli intervention. Remember, to the north is Lebanon, increasingly destabilised by Hezbollah, a proxy of Iran. So, yeah, Iran is everywhere, is my point.
It is very complicated, and as you said, with so many different countries having a say, having an influence, it's going to be very difficult to see how this is actually resolved, given it's been going on for so long. Let's move on to the Financial Times and the stark headline here, given a week on since the huge volatility in the markets. New era of volatility dawning on markets, but this is coming from the world's biggest hedge fund.
Yes, and there's a certain irony here to me that Bob Prince of Bridgewater, of course, hedge funds hedge against what happens in the market. So, in one level, you'd think higher levels of volatility is probably quite welcome for a hedge funder. So I don't have huge amounts of sympathy with his 160 billion under management. But he, you know, definitely right. We talked about this earlier in the programme. High interest rates tighter monetary policy, high levels of inflation. All of these things are factors that investors are playing with and do mark a new era in the financial cycle. But what this means for the average person on the street is also really important. Inflation, what does that mean? Well, that means your shopping basket gets more expensive. It means you get less boom for your buck when you travel. It means your mortgage, if you were to tract mortgage, becomes more expensive. But if you're a saver, higher interest rates are good things. But volatility is not good for anybody, really, apart from hedge funders.
OK, and there's more analysis here, isn't there, in The Guardian. Market wobbles, a switch is flipped and Renaissance is suddenly fragile. So this is actually some very interesting analysis of what actually has happened in the past week.
Yes, it is, and it reflects on this last 10 years of central banks really coming to the fore, printing money, propping up against this global volatility after the financial crisis. It's in The Guardian, a slightly left-leaning article. It points out that austerity has affected things like the UK's National Health Service, at the same time as increasing money printed by the government. There's a certain irony there. It points also, and I come back to this equitable spread of growth. Wages, real-term wages, have not grown. So whilst the jobless figures in the US are really positive, the economic mood music globally in post-Davos has been really, really good, yet the markets have tumbled, 5% losses we're looking, and that was after a pickup on Friday. This ain't good news. And the point here is that actually this guy writing, Larry Elliott, is saying that the central banks have played too much of a role over the last 10 years, and now it's time for markets to start playing their role and perhaps go back to what the status quo was before. And he says that is not good news, because we've not learned the lessons. He
also has some analysis about what happened last week, because everyone made the assumption that the markets split because of a jobs report that came out more than a week ago on Friday now. But actually, he says some of these assumptions that Wall Street made were questionable.
Yes, because actually, real-term, the cost of wages has not kept up with inflation in the US. In fact, it's very low in the US. In the UK, it's slightly higher, but it's not kept up either. So whilst jobs have increased, take-home pay has decreased. Yeah, there's a lot of, like all of these things, damn lies and statistics.
Why has he brought in this picture of this sale of Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi, which went for a huge $400 million, didn't it, at auction?
Well, his point is that this economic status quo of the last 10 years has really just kept these tip-top assets such as fine art, top-level property increasing, while the average person on the street has not benefited anything from that. OK, let's have a look at our last story now. Do you have a Facebook account? Are you a user of Facebook? I do, but I feel very old reading this because apparently Snapchat and Instagram are the thing of the youth. In fact, older people, the over 55s, are the largest growing demographic on Facebook. So no longer silver surfers. But it makes the point, doesn't it, that because Facebook is now, 14 years old, I think it says, that as the population gets older, they want to be more in touch with younger people, but actually younger people are moving away from it now. Absolutely. There was this point that grandparents want to keep up on Facebook to watch their grandchildren. And I think that's a very valid point. Just stepping back a little bit, though, social media has transformed the world. And, the emerging markets that I work in, it's transformed it and it's here to stay. And I just think there's a certain irony. A lot of older people 10, 14 years ago said, never go near Facebook. Of course, they're now on it. It's an undeniable factor of modern life. Facebook is having its own renaissance, isn't it, and changing its algorithm so it promotes more what family and friends have to say and sharing of that content. And also, they're making such a large amount of money. And they've also bought Instagram, and of course Instagram is the great other one that they've all fled Facebook to go to. So yes. I don't think Mark Zuckerberg's having any sleepless nights over this. We don't need to worry all that much. $4.3 billion profit in the final quarter of last year. That was a 6% year-on-year rise, wasn't it? Yeah, and 6%
is it unstoppable?
Growth. Who knows? We've seen bubbles before. We talked about tech bubbles before. Social media bubbles? Who knows? OK, thank you very much, Oliver. Great to see you this morning. Thank you for taking us through the papers. Also, don't forget to get in touch with the question that we are asking today with the scandal engulfing Oxfam. Is it going to change the way that you donate and who you donate to? Get in touch, use the hashtag BBC The Briefing. From me, Samantha Simmons, and the rest of the team, it's goodbye for now. Thank you very much for watching.
The English Premier League is in full flow, and you need to make sure you don't miss out. You can keep up to date on TV, online, and with the BBC Sport app, with features including the latest gossip, score predictor, personalised push alerts, and guides to all the upcoming action. Wherever you are in the world and whatever you're doing, football is for all of us. On BBC World News, the BBC Sport website and the BBC Sport app.
Today is another new beginning. I will be more considerate and look for the things that make me smile. I will pursue happiness, longing for light to shine into everyone's dreams. I will share my desires and listen to those of others.
Experience and enjoy life. We are here to help you fulfill your dreams. We are HNA. We keep innovating and we share love selflessly with the world.